Okay, so we've got the basics of our shooting system working. So let's start making it a little bit more fun and a little bit more functional. So the first thing we're going to do is add a way to have an auto firing system. So we just have to hold the button down and our bullets will continue to fire. So for that, let's jump back into our player controller script. And if we go up the top here, and if I have my bullet impact, and down below that, I'm going to add a public float for time between shots. And then I'm going to have a private float for shot counter. Now, why do I have two values like this? So our time between shots, I'm going to actually just set that to be 0.1 by default. So time between shots is pretty self-explanatory. How long it's going to take between each shot to go. So what we're going to do is when you hold the button down, we'll make the time tick down, and when it gets to 0, we'll shoot a bullet and then make it go back up to the maximum value. But of course, if we were to just count this value down to 0, then we wouldn't know what to set it back up to as a maximum. So instead, we use this shot counter to set a minimum value, set an invisible value that we keep track of, and this is what we're going to use to handle shooting more than one shot. So let's scroll down into where we do our shooting. So here we're saying when we get our mouse button down, shoot our bullet. And then whenever we shoot a bullet, I'm going to scroll down here, and just below where we do our raycast and handle our impacts, just after that, I'm going to say our shot counter should be equal to our time between shots. So we're resetting it to 0.1. So basically, as soon as we click shoot, shot counter becomes 0.1. And then if we keep holding that button down, let's go back up to here where our shoot is. So after we do that first shoot, we're going to then check, hey, are we still holding that button? So if input dot get button, so instead of saying get button down, we're just going to check get button. Sorry, not get button, get mouse button was what I meant to say. And again, we're going to keep checking if we're doing the left click. So if we're holding the left click down, we'll then make the shot counter count downwards. And how we can do that is say shot counter minus equals time.delta time. So here we're saying take away the time.delta time from our shot counter. So we already know time.delta time is how long each update takes to happen. And so then this will take it away from the shot counter, obviously. And if our shot counter, for example, was 1 second, then time.delta time would be, okay, it'll take 1 second between each shot to do the shot counter. So when that counts down, we're just going to check then if our shot counter is less than or equal to 0. So we do less than or equal to 0 because time.delta time is not a very specific number. It can be like 0.016 or 0.012 or something like that. It'll jump around each frame. And because of that, when we take it away from our shot counter, the chances of us getting exactly 0, so we could do if our shot counter is exactly 0, but the chances of that happening are very, very slim. Instead, we check, hey, is it 0 or did it go below 0? If either of those things are true, so if it's less than or equal to 0, then hey, it's time for another shot, so do the shoot function. And this is part of why we created a shoot function earlier, was so that we don't have to rewrite the same code again in here. So we could have that, we'd have to have all the shooting and raycasting stuff here, and then the same stuff again here. And then if you wanted to make any changes to either of those, you'd have to write it in both places each time. So that's why we just use an extra little function down below. So now let's save this. We jump back into Unity. And we should see, if I press play and just hold my button down, there we go. We just get rapid fire shots popping out in our game. So perfect. That's how we very, very simply and easily add a auto firing system into our game.